Today, we are undertaking just a spectacular journey into this strange global pathology of financial distrust.
It really is an extraordinary story.
We're heading far, far away to a remote, lush, and, well, war-scarred island in the South Pacific.
And we're there to meet a man who has somehow managed to bridge the gap between, a classic local Ponzi scheme.
And the darkest corners of international financial conspiracy culture. It's an incredible link.
It's a convergence of history, trauma, and ideology that's almost hard to believe. Yeah. Our focus is on Noah Musingku.
Right, a man who, after running this multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme, he didn't just disappear.
No, he transformed. He became His Majesty David Peii II, a self-proclaimed king, and he now reigns over this armed cargo cult, as some call it, deep within an ungovernable section of Bougainville.
And the reason we're doing this deep dive is to understand not just the fraud itself, but this global fan club he managed to attract.
Yeah, and for that, we're drawing on an extensive investigation by the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, OCCRP.
They actually managed to reach Musinku's remote compound, which is an amazing feat in itself.
It is. They went to investigate how he, a fugitive Ponzi schemer, runs a bogus central bank, issues a worthless currency, and yet somehow still draws in these international followers who've lost all faith in the global financial order.
The image that really defines this whole story, and it's our hook for today, is the king himself. You have to picture him.
It's quite a sight. He's a relatively slight man, often wearing this British-style red military jacket.
And an incongruous bright blue sash and a crown made of cowrie shells.
Exactly. And he's sitting in this cluttered, haphazard office in the middle of a no-go zone, typing warnings on a laptop about the imminent collapse of the Western economy.
And at the same time, promising the shower of riches to anyone who transfers their allegiance to his golden kingdom.
It's not just fraud. It is theater. It's this unbelievable intersection of post-colonial despair, economic collapse, and, well, modern sovereign citizen ideology.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the geography and the man who became king. Noah Musingku. What was his journey?
It's a profound metamorphosis, really. Musingku started, by all accounts, as a pious young man.
Okay.
But his reputation was very quickly overtaken by financial notoriety. This was around the turn of the millennium when he launched the U-Vistract Ponzi scheme.
And that was incredibly successful, at least for a while.
Oh, massively successful. Before it collapsed, authorities estimate it netted tens of millions of dollars from victims all across the South Pacific region.
And now, as you said, he's King David Peii II, the divine ruler of the twin kingdoms of Papala and Mea.
And he's been a fugitive for 2 decades, living deep in the interior of Bougainville.
So how does a failed Ponzi schemer manage to do that, to crown himself king and find this level of, protected anonymity?
To get that, you really have to understand the land he occupies. Bougainville is a unique place.
Right.
It's lush, geographically stunning, but it's also deeply, deeply scarred by one of the 20th century's most brutal internal conflicts.
And it's technically part of Papua New Guinea PNG, but it has its own distinct culture.
Very distinct. It's culturally and ethnically much closer to the Solomon Islands.
And its history is just defined by this incredible natural wealth. That's really the key, isn't it? That wealth is what attracted the big multinational companies and ultimately led to the trauma that Musingku now exploits.
Exactly. The Spanish explorer Alvaro de Mendaña, he named the archipelago the Solomons way back in 1568.
Because he was convinced he'd found the source of the biblical King Solomon's legendary gold.
Right. And that legend was, in a way, realized in the 1970s when Rio Tinto opened the Panguna mine.
Which was, at the time, one of the largest open-pit gold and copper mines in the entire world.
On a massive generator of revenue, billions, globally.
But what was the cost locally? Because that seems to be the crucial context for Musingku's rise.
The cost was everything. The wealth just flowed out. It generated huge income for the PNG government, for foreign shareholders, but very, very little was distributed to the local landowners.
And on top of that injustice, the environmental damage must have been catastrophic.
Oh, it was. Polluted rivers, deforestation, the sheer scale of the waste. This inequality and destruction created a powder keg.
Which then exploded in 1988. That's what initiated what they call the Bougainville crisis.
Precisely. A local revolt erupted. The locals, they were fed up. They quickly drove out the mining company and then repelled the PNG security forces.
And they used whatever they could find, right? Old rifles, even samurai swords left over from the Japanese occupation in WWII.
And they converted mining vehicles into these makeshift armored cars. So PNG responded with a massive naval blockade, which effectively sealed the island off from all trade, all medicine, all fuel.
This detail is so essential because it fundamentally destabilized the entire concept of currency and trade for over a decade. You have to understand the depth of that trauma.
It was total economic collapse. Suddenly there were no imported goods, no fuel, limited medicine, no manufactured food.
So the PNG currency, the kina, it must have become almost meaningless.
It did. There was nothing to buy with it. People had to rely on this extreme self-sufficiency. They built small hydropower generators.
And they famously and resourcefully adapted their cars and trucks to run entirely on crude coconut oil.
Yeah, a process known as copra fueling. It's an incredible detail, isn't it?
It's a profound detail. When people are literally running their cars on coconuts because the global financial system has completely abandoned them, it illustrates a deep structural failure.
It does. And the human cost was just staggering. Estimates suggest between 15 and 20,000 people died during that conflict, many from preventable diseases because medicine couldn't get through the blockade.
So when a society experiences that kind of structural trauma, I mean, the collective faith in the state, in banks, in formal money, it's just completely eroded.
And that vacuum of legitimacy is exactly where Musingku returned.
He comes back around 2003. He'd been charged with contempt of court and declared insolvent in Port Moresby 3 years earlier. He was a fugitive.
Right, he tried to hide in the Solomon Islands, but was quickly expelled. So he comes back to the one place that is still ungovernable, the interior of Bougainville, the no-go zone.
A wanted man, but he immediately starts building a new state.
He links up with the most hardline former rebel leader, a man named Francis Ona, who was still holding out near the abandoned Pengerna mine.
And Ona was planning to declare the ancient kingdom of Mekamui independent.
He was. And Musingku offered him a symbiotic deal.
What was the deal?
Musingku proposed that his old U-Vistract concept, this promise of explosive wealth, would form the entire financial foundation for Ona's new kingdom.
So it's a trade. Ona provides the armed legitimacy and the territory.
And Musingku provides the promise of a global gold-backed currency that would make the new state instantly wealthy and, superior to the whole fiat-based world. Ona agreed.
But then Ona died in 2005, and Musingku didn't hesitate.
Not for a second. He took over. He moved to his ancestral village of Tonu, rallied Ona's remaining armed faction, and just crowned himself King David Peii II.
The fugitive Ponzi schemer became an absolute monarch.
And then he immediately set about creating all the necessary outward trappings of a legitimate state. In Tonu, you can find what they call the Royal Palace,
which is a large building made from wood, thatch, and corrugated metal.
He built a parliament. And most critically for his global scheme, he established a self-declared suite of financial institutions, a central bank, a local bank, and the International Bank of Mekamui, or IBAM.
This mimicry of statehood, it eventually drew the attention of the legally recognized Bougainville government.
It did. In 2006, fighters aligned with the legal government tried to forcibly clear out Musingku's compound. It was a failure.
A failure that ended in significant violence.
4 of Musingku's bodyguards were killed, and Musingku himself was shot through the neck during the fight. He survived.
And that survival, I imagine, just cemented his image as this persecuted, divinely protected figure in the eyes of his followers.
Absolutely. And that incident is key to his continued untouchable status. He remains a wanted man by PNG and technically by the autonomous Bougainville government.
But the stakes are just too high for them to act.
Absolutely. Bougainville is preparing for a possible full independence vote from PNG, maybe as early as 2027.
So the current government is desperate to maintain peace and stability to make sure that process is successful.
They cannot afford to reignite an armed conflict by trying to arrest Musingku, who has this entrenched armed following and is operating in a sensitive remote area right near that valuable mine.
So they leave him alone.
They leave him alone. He has a perfect protected laboratory for his financial fantasy.
A protected laboratory. Okay, that brings us to how he scaled his scheme from, a classic fraud to a global religious movement backed by this bogus currency, the BVK.
Right. The initial scheme, U-Vistract, was pure Charles Ponzi. Promise impossibly high returns, pay existing investors with new investor money, and just keep doubling the principal until the well runs dry.
He launched it in the late 1990s and promised to double funds every single month.
Every month. And because faith in the official system was already so shaky across the South Pacific, it gained immediate traction.
We really can't overstate the scale of this. The sources noted that U-Vistract and similar fast money schemes absorbed an astonishing 7% of Papua New Guinea's national GDP at the time.
7%. This wasn't a few isolated scams. This was a national economic distraction.
And the consequences for individual lives were devastating.
They were. The story of Naomi Sanya, a market vendor in Buka, it really illustrates the psychological trap. She put in about $90, a huge sum for her, and watched in amazement as it doubled within 2 weeks.
So she withdrew some, confirming the system worked in her mind.
Exactly. Then she rolled over the rest, trusting the process, and watched her account balance soar, on paper, to $12,500.
And that paper wealth just evaporated overnight when the whole thing collapsed.
Precisely. Regulators caught up. Australian operations were shut down in 1999 after $600,000 was taken. P&G revoked his license.
And a court-appointed liquidator later found that $20 to $30 million had flowed through Musingku's accounts before the inevitable crash.
So he was bankrupt, indicted, and running.
But instead of going into hiding and running a quiet life, he went in the exact opposite direction. He ramped up the rhetoric from simply making people rich to, well, saving the world.
This is where we have to introduce the concept of cognitive dissonance. It's a crucial psychological defense mechanism that the source material identifies.
So when Musingku's original simple promises failed, he couldn't just admit he was a failure or a fraudster.
No, that would mean confronting the huge losses and, the legal consequences.
Yep. So what's the alternative?
The alternative is escalation. You dial up the rhetoric, you claim the reason the money stopped flowing wasn't that the math didn't work.
But because a dark, powerful enemy, the global banking cabal, the government, is actively working against you.
Right. Persecuting you for trying to enact a holy revolution and reform the entire global financial system.
And that reframes the failure as martyrdom, which keeps the faithful, unpaid followers committed.
Exactly. The fraudster is now a prophet. Failure proves the existence of the conspiracy, and the prophet Musingku is the only one who can solve it.
And the physical manifestation of this escalator promise is the Bougainville kina, the BVK.
A currency that is globally worthless and completely illegal in PNG.
And it's printed on this crude, glossy paper bearing his royal portrait.
And Musingku claims it was printed in all these different locations like Canada, Russia, and Australia. The crucial promise of the BVK is that it is legitimate, righteous money.
And he backs it up with these absurd exponential promises through his International Bank of Makamoi IBOM.
Through IBOM, he offers compound interest rates as high as 100% per month on BVK-denominated accounts.
100% a month.
A month. And what makes this sound legitimate to his followers is his claim that this money is backed not by government debt, but by billions, potentially trillions, in untapped, genuine, God-given gold sitting right beneath Bougainville's surface, just waiting since the Panguna mine closed.
So Musingku has the geography, the armed protection, the historical trauma of the island, and now the righteous gold-backed currency. That sense of righteousness is what allowed him to find a perfect audience thousands of miles away.
Which leads us seamlessly into the global hook.
Right. The transition works because Musingku needed to attract people who were already prepared to believe that the established system was fraudulent.
This is where we're looking at the convergence of a localized Pacific scheme with this broad global conspiracy culture, primarily rooted in the right-wing, libertarian, and anti-government thought that's so prevalent in the West.
And the common denominator is just deep, shattered faith.
And the 2008 financial crisis was the accelerant for that global distrust. For many people, that event didn't just feel like a recession. It felt like a purposeful betrayal by the system itself.
Precisely. You take David Johnson, the financial advisor in Iowa, we'll talk about more later. For him and so many others, the crisis just shattered their belief in the fundamental legitimacy of the U.S. financial system.
And it opened them up to these fringe theories that explain why.
So let's elaborate on the core critique, the rejection of fiat currency. Since the U.S. dollar was decoupled from gold in the 1970s, fringe groups dismiss it entirely. Why do they call it debt-based and satanic?
Well, it stems from the fact that modern currency isn't backed by a physical commodity like gold. It's backed only by the promise and stability of the issuing government. It's fiat.
Right.
For these critics, the moment money became backed by government promise and bank debt, specifically its relationship to the Federal Reserve printing mechanism, it became fundamentally fraudulent. They believed that they were trading in debt, not real value.
And that this entire system is, in their words, evil and wicked and satanic.
It's a fundamental rejection of the foundational trust required for modern economics. And when you reject the state's legitimacy, where do you turn?
You turn to the sovereign citizen ideology.
The sovereign citizen movement is rooted in the belief that through these complex pseudo-legal arguments, often involving archaic interpretations of common law or these supposed hidden government trusts, individuals can exempt themselves from state authority.
So taxes, courts, regulations, all of it.
Right. So they're looking for money that also exists outside of state authority, and the BVK, backed by an independent armed kingdom and gold. It must look like an absolute godsend.
It's an irresistible narrative fit. When you reject the established source of legitimacy, the U.S. government and the Fed, you start seeking validation in these obscure, novel sources.
That's why these groups obsess over things like Iraqi dinars, believing a currency from a politically unstable region will magically revalue, or century-old Chinese bonds, which they claim are secretly redeemable for astronomical sums.
So the BVK, offering gold in a kingdom, provides the highest degree of novel, spiritual legitimacy possible.
Musingku didn't even have to leave his compound to find his first key Western allies. The first was a man named Jeffrey Richards, or Prince Jeff.
Prince Jeff provided the blueprint. He had already co-founded the independent sovereign neutral nation of Bougainville, a microstate declaration in Australia back in the 1980s.
So he was the perfect, experienced advisor to help Musingku formalize his operation.
He gave Musingku the instruction manual for pseudo-state architecture. He estimates his BVK holdings are now worth a couple of $1 trillion.
Which is an amazing number.
I have to ask, what is the basis for that valuation? Is it just fantasy numbers written on a piece of paper?
It is entirely fantasy. It's based on Musingku's promised compound interest rates applied to an initial investment, denominated in a currency that has no recognized value anywhere.
But Richard's contribution was practical, not just ideological. He explicitly helped Musingku structure the kingdom's governance, create his flag, his postal stamps,
and draft the sovereignty declaration. And this relationship wasn't quiet. We have this incredible story of Prince Jeff and his associate, Lord James Nesbitt, flying a Cessna private jet illegally into the no-go zone's dirt airstrip in 2006.
The drama is just palpable. They spent 2 mind-boggling years inside Musingku's interior kingdom, witnessing the coronation and the initial establishment of all these financial trappings.
They were eventually arrested and deported, but that illegal visit had a profound and lasting technical legacy.
The satellite dish.
The satellite dish. Prince Jeff's principal and most critical contribution was installing a satellite internet connection in 2008.
And that was the exact piece of infrastructure that launched Musingku onto the global digital stage.
He used it immediately. Right before the global financial crisis truly peaked, he launched the iBomb website. This was the moment the local scheme achieved global reach.
And the man who monetized that global reach was Benjamin Young, a retired electrical engineer from Texas who co-headed something called the Internet Catalog Club, or ICC.
Young explicitly operated within this fringe anti-government ecosystem. He told OCCRP he believed the global banking system is built on fraud.
And the ICC was a networking club that charged a small $25 entry fee. Members traded in these complex digital tokens, including one called Zcash.
Right. The SEC later found that scheme took $4 million from investors, though Young claimed these were merely tokens for rides at a carnival, not securities.
But their real specialty was dealing in these pseudo-legal instruments favored by the sovereign citizens, the promissory notes and international bills of exchange, or IBOEs. Can you clarify what they believe these are?
This is crucial for understanding the deception. Sovereign citizens believe that when a person is born, the government creates a secret trust fund, a sort of hidden bank account or strawman identity.
And it's worth astronomical sums based on the belief that a person is future collateral for the national debt.
Right. And IBOEs and promissory notes are pieces of paper that they claim can legally access or leverage this secret government account.
So they are literally issuing IOUs against secret government funds that don't actually exist.
Precisely. And while the ICC made it easy for members to invest U.S. dollars, getting actual cash back was nearly impossible.
Right, reinforced by the ICC's policy of adhering to a biblical injunction against litigation.
Which meant all reimbursement was offered only in their internal in-house tokens.
So around 2011, this pseudo-legal ecosystem finds its physical embodiment in Musingku. The ICC and the king established a formal alliance.
And ICC members were given a pathway to convert their worthless IOUs, the promissory notes, IBOEs, and Iraqi dinars, into high-interest BVK accounts at Musingku's International Bank of Mayakamwe.
It created a perfect circular economy of nonsense.
It did. But the irony is just astounding. To complete this conversion of their worthless paper, sovereign citizens who despise fiat currency had to pay Musingku an additional $450 in actual tangible U.S. fiat currency.
A cash funnel straight into the no-go zone.
Musingku receives a torrent of hard currency and what looked like international deposits and legitimacy. And the ICC members received the promise of that absurd exponential growth. Musingku was offering a 75% per month compounded interest rate.
Mathematically, that rate turns even a modest deposit into a millionaire in just over a year. It's the ultimate financial fantasy.
And the belief was so total that Benjamin Young, the Texas engineer, he went through the official process of registering with the U.S. government as an official diplomat of Musingku's self-declared royal government.
Unbelievable.
And ICC members took over managing the IBOM website and began holding investment seminars globally, successfully fusing sovereign citizen talking points with the myth of King Solomon's gold.
The scheme was global, and that brings us to the consequences. The strange pilgrimages to the kingdom and the devastating legal fallout in the West.
The documentation gathered by the OCCRP investigators, it includes Musingku's red guestbook. And since 2008, it's recorded this continuous stream of curious foreigners arriving in this remote jungle compound.
A builder from Sussex, 2 Florida megachurch pastors, a Japanese businessman.
The variety is incredible. Take Christopher Wigley, a London building safety consultant. He visited largely out of curiosity. He knew Musingku from a Pentecostal event in the 90s.
He was a guest, and Musingku used the opportunity for pure performative theater.
Wigley was knighted in Musingku's parliament while wearing a sweat-drenched white business shirt, as the sources note, and appointed the special emissary to Queen Elizabeth II.
That is just bafflingly absurd. And he took the title seriously enough to deliver the royal token, this shell breastplate, to Buckingham Palace security.
It's theater designed entirely to impress the locals and reinforce the king's self-declared global legitimacy. The security guards at the palace gates were reportedly very polite when receiving the shell thing.
But for Musingku's followers in Tonu, this was a clear, visible sign that the powerful, established Western royalty recognized their king.
Exactly. And you mentioned a Japanese businessman.
Shinji Kumazawa, a Tokyo businessman who visited in 2014.
He was inspired by Bougainville's history of struggle and made a pilgrimage to the crash site of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's plane, which was shot down during World War II. After this symbolic gesture, Kumazawa was appointed Musingku's ambassador to Japan.
But for those bringing the bogus currency in, the risk was very high. Barry Webb, a Floridian with a rap sheet for fraud, he agreed to transport the BVK.
Webb was caught in 2014 at Port Moresby's airport with a suitcase holding about $620,000 worth of BVK notes.
And although the charges against him were eventually dismissed, Musingku still remembers him.
Oh yeah, he references him in emails as Sir Barry K. Webb and recalls his moving, welcoming ceremony. This just reinforces the king's ability to turn any legal trouble into validation for his followers.
And the high-profile conspiracy circuit also took notice. Benjamin Fulford, the Canadian writer with this massive online following for his White Dragon Society,
which he claims is a consortium of ninjas and intelligence agents fighting a global cabal. He visited Musingku in 2017.
And Fulford went back online and immediately regaled his followers with tales of a hidden gold-filled island that had defeated the Rothschilds and the global central banks.
That type of endorsement is incredibly valuable. It embeds Musingku and the BVK deep within the anti-globalist, anti-banking conspiracy narrative.
But the story turns genuinely tragic when we look at the American perpetrators, who were also, in a way, victims. The story of David Johnson, the Iowa financial advisor, is just heartbreaking.
It is the ultimate case study in sincere self-deception and conviction. Johnson was a devout father of 10, well-regarded, and seemingly trustworthy to his community in north-central Iowa.
He wasn't a traditional, cynical fraudster. His conviction that the U.S. system had failed made him believe he had found a truly righteous, God-backed currency in the BVK.
He genuinely believed the BVK was the ark, protecting his community from the impending economic storm.
He saw the dollar as evil and wicked and satanic.
Exactly. He pitched the BVK as a necessary spiritual and financial protection, convincing family, friends, and church acquaintances to open these IBOM accounts. He collected over $330,000 from about 6 people.
And the specific victims illustrate the depth of the betrayal. Lois Roos invested $5,000 of her retirement funds, hoping the returns would support her foundation for the homeless.
And Carly Schaefer put in $150,000, money from her late mother's estate, trusting Johnson because of his deep Christian convictions.
His court explanation was chilling in its simplicity.
It was. He told the prosecutor that he intended to take some of this money and put it in a sock and bury it for a while, and then we'll come back out after the sun is shining again and the storm is gone.
He didn't see himself enriching himself. He believed he was saving them.
Rob Sand, the prosecutor in Johnson's 2017 criminal trial for theft, he noted that Johnson used his Christianity as a front, but what struck him was Johnson's absolute, unshakable belief in the fantasy.
Even when faced with jail, Johnson was trying to convince the detective that the BVK was a great investment.
And that he would eventually pay everyone back using the ICC's internal tokens.
This deep cognitive commitment, this inability to recognize reality when the fantasy is so essential for emotional survival, is why the judge, Kurt Stobbe, issued such a severe sentence.
He did. Johnson was convicted and sentenced to the maximum 20 years, a penalty prosecutors hadn't even requested.
And Judge Stobbe's reasoning just encapsulates the danger of this type of sincere belief.
Stobbe's rationale was devastatingly clear. He stated, "How do I protect society from someone who doesn't think they've done anything wrong? How do I do that? I have to put them in prison."
Because Johnson's sincerity was exactly what made him so dangerous. He would simply continue the scheme the moment he was free.
And Johnson wasn't an isolated case. We see similar patterns, like Edward Kimpel, an Ohio man who took over $1.4 million from at least 44 people, falsely claiming to be a former Navy SEAL while promoting these schemes.
The Global Club had real profound financial and legal fallout in the West. It connects that remote island directly to an American courtroom.
And this brings us to the final shocking twist. The Ponzi king turns the tables and cries fraud against the very global partners who brought him international fame.
The ultimate irony and betrayal. By 2015, Musingku suddenly halts the entire global scheme, claiming he was being scammed by his Western partners.
The Internet Catalog Club. He issued a decree stating that the international bills of exchange and promissory notes the ICC had funneled to him were a deceit and fraud and were presented to me and officers of IBOM under fraudulent misrepresentations.
So the man responsible for one of the South Pacific's most notorious Ponzi schemes decided that he, the king, was the victim of sophisticated Western con artists, a masterclass in projection.
In rapid succession, Musingku issued royal decrees, freezing all IBOM operations and summarily extinguishing the accounts set up in partnership with the ICC.
So trillions of BVK, held by his international followers and based on those IBOEs, were just zeroed out instantly.
The Western promoters scrambled to contain the disaster. ICC co-founder Young tried to spin it as a necessary split, claiming he'd received a warning from the U.S. Embassy in TNG.
And he offered victims the ability to convert their BVK losses into ICC's internal tokens, assuring them no harm done.
But Musinku's own royal advisor tells a more candid story. Patrick Steensma, a Dutch lawyer who had been drawn in by the ICC's pitch and later became Musinku's legal advisor, he secretly flew back to Bougainville in 2015.
And Steensma, who had written his own book on the international banking cabal, was sophisticated enough to recognize fraud when he saw it.
He concluded that the ICC instruments were bunk, the same pseudo-legal garbage they claimed to despise.
And Steensma helped Musingku draft the royal decree to zero out the ICC accounts. He acknowledged that he himself had been hoodwinked by Young and his associates who were skilled at smoke screening things.
Right. And Steensma's assessment of Musingku provides this rare, objective psychological window into the king's mind. He described Musingku as not a bad faith, but in a bit of a semi-la-la land, regarding his idea of setting up a viable financial system.
That's a crucial distinction. It suggests that while Musingku might have started as a purely cynical fraudster in the 90s,
the decades of isolation and the necessity of escalating his claims led to genuine self-deception. He became so deeply committed to the prophetic narrative of the righteous king and the gold-backed currency that he lacked the sophistication to recognize when he himself was being manipulated by other sophisticated con artists.
His overconfidence made him blind.
Exactly. So Musingku settles back into his armed compound, his global network fractured, and the financial system he created is left in limbo.
This entire operation, the king, the palace, the fake central bank, it points us toward a concept we really need to explore fully: the modern cargo cult.
The term cargo cult historically describes these millenarian movements that arose in Melanesian islands, particularly after World War II.
Right. Local people, observing the sudden arrival of immense material wealth, the cargo, brought by technologically advanced societies, often military forces, They began to mimic their rituals in the hope of summoning those goods.
We hear the classic anecdotes, building wooden fighter planes or carving fake radios out of coconuts, hoping to entice the Western ships and planes carrying the material wealth to land.
So Musingku's performance, therefore, is a direct 21st century manifestation of this phenomenon.
His royal palace, his parliament, his central bank, the International Bank of Macomery, the printing press that spews out the BVK, all of it is a detailed mimicry of international finance and state institutions.
It's an effort to perform the advanced rituals of the financial world to summon the cargo of global recognition and wealth.
But the sources wisely caution us that the term cargo cult can carry colonial baggage. It can imply a kind of naive simplicity that isn't fully accurate.
And that's why anthropologist John Cox's critique is so powerful. He raises a provocative question. If Musingku's faith-based financial system, built on a promise of hidden gold, is a cargo cult, then what are the West's own fringe financial trends?
He asks if the sovereign citizen schemes, the faith in instruments like IBOEs that are backed by nothing but rhetoric or even certain aspects of decentralized cryptocurrency, aren't simply sophisticated high-tech forms of cargo cults themselves.
It reframes the entire discussion. It suggests a universal human tendency to seek dark money, a financial system that operates outside the state's control and is backed by a superior, often mystical form of legitimacy when faith in the established system collapses.
The BVK doesn't just fill an economic vacuum. It fills a spiritual and philosophical one. It leverages the desire for sovereignty and justice in a way the fiat system seemingly cannot.
And despite the 2015 collapse, despite the zeroing out of accounts, the dream is far from dead for Musingku's most faithful followers.
Which brings us to his third act, the unending wait for the universal payout program.
In the compound in Tonu, Musingku's followers have elevated him to this near-divine, immortal status.
Philip Mapa, his Minister of Finance, claims Musingku is near immortal and will live beyond 1,000 years, having signed decrees that are valid for that entire period.
And Musingku himself has provided the theological justification for the scheme's failure, invoking Christianity to explain the delays.
He stated that his system needed to be killed before it could be resurrected, like Jesus Christ. But the timeline has been adjusted. Musingku required 3 decades, not 3 days, for his financial system to rise again.
And the wait is supposedly culminating now. Musingku promises a state of emergency that will finally kick off the Universal Payout Program, the UPP, the long-awaited financial rapture.
He communicates this near weekly through emails to his global followers, promising that payments are imminent. He cites letters of support from the UN and US and claims he needs only a final required conference call with an unnamed president before the funds are released.
And he says the entire world is dancing to our universal payout music, knowingly or unknowingly.
The fact that people still believe this after years of delays and the 2015 zero out, it just shows the raw power of conviction we talked about earlier.
Prince Jeff, who flew the Cessna in, still expects his payment of a couple of $1 trillion.
Which he says he plans to use to build roads and houses in Musingku's kingdom. His faith is unbroken because the alternative, admitting decades of life and effort were wasted on a fantasy, is simply too painful to contemplate.
And most strikingly, we circle back to David Johnson, the Iowa father of 10. He was released early from his 20-year sentence.
And his time in prison, which was intended to protect society from his sincere belief, it failed to change his mind.
Johnson remains completely undeterred. He still views the BVK as a solid, God-backed investment.
He's expecting his massive windfall in the next couple of weeks, just waiting for the king to finish the final bureaucratic steps. The cycle of conviction, exploitation, collapse, and renewed faith continues unbroken, connecting that remote South Pacific village directly to the streets of Iowa.
What an absolute masterclass in exploiting belief. We've navigated a journey from a war-scarred Pacific island ravaged by colonial extraction and blockades through the ideological vacuum of the 2008 financial crisis right into an American courtroom.
All connected by a man in a cowrie shell crown and a fundamental, deeply held rejection of the established world order.
This deep dive really reveals that Musingku's saga is not just a standard financial fraud case. It's an exploration of the profound psychological need for belief in a righteous system, when the traditional state-backed system is perceived as fundamentally corrupt or actively failing.
He didn't need to be solvent or financially successful. He only needed to be perceived as authentic and anti-establishment.
And the core insight here is that the sovereign citizen rejection of formal government authority provides the necessary novel legitimacy for an otherwise completely valueless scheme like the BVK, to flourish globally.
Right. If you genuinely believe the dollar is backed by lies, debt, and the devil, then why wouldn't you believe Musingku's BDK is backed by gold, God, and a divine king? It becomes a choice between two articles of faith.
And for many, the faith in a revolutionary gold-backed king operating outside the system is far more compelling than the faith required to trust the Federal Reserve.
Which leaves us with a provocative closing thought for you, the listener. We have seen how easy it is for Noah Musingku to create a bogus currency based on a promise of untapped gold beneath a remote island.
But if modern fiat currency is simply backed by the formal word of a government, the faith in that government's stability and power, how strong is that faith really in the long term?
What happens to the financial system when collective faith is broadly and systemically lost? And what kinds of kings and alternative currencies are waiting in the digital or remote physical vacuum to fill that void?
Something to ponder the next time you hear a massive promise backed only by pure, unadulterated conviction.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive.